The New York Times just put out a bombshell story about Trump's running mate, JD Vance. In the story, the New York Times talks to someone who was a close friend of JD Vance's and reveals text messages and emails between the two of them that show a totally different side to JD Vance. This is not the right-wing culture warrior that America is seeing now and shows what a fraud JD Vance is in changing his views in pursuit of political power. I'll go over the whole thing with you guys right now. The New York Times spoke with a trans woman named Sophia Nelson, who says she was friends with JD Vance starting in 2010 and showed the New York Times about 90 emails and text messages exchanged between the two of them. JD Vance and his friend Sophia talked about a variety of subjects, including politics. And in those emails and text messages the two exchanged, JD Vance expressed some opinions that he clearly doesn't have now. For example, they talked about the killing of Michael Brown, an 18-year-old black man, by a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri back in 2014. And JD Vance flat out said, "I hate the police." Look at this. In an email from JD Vance to Sophia Nelson, he said, "Anyways, just my thoughts. I'm pretty proud of what Cincinnati has done, but don't know anything about tying grant funding to body cameras. I love the body camera movement and anything that puts cops back in the mindset of service and protection instead of control and coercion. I hate the police. Given the number of negative experiences that I've had in the past few years, I can't imagine what a black guy goes through." Can you imagine JD Vance saying something like that right now? There's just no way. And that wasn't that long ago that he made these comments. And when it comes to race relations, JD Vance even expressed some positive feelings about things like reparations. Around the same time, the written conversations turned to a much-discussed essay by Ta-Nehisi Coates in The Atlantic, making the case for reparations. Mr. Vance offered that whatever problems he had with reparations, generally, I have at least been convinced of the virtue of compensating modern victims who've suffered redlining or denial of federal benefits. It would be incredible to hear a Republican say something like this now. Can you imagine? And in regards to the horrific shooting of 9 people at the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, JD Vance said the following. Mr. Vance said he didn't understand why people can't see the connection between this person murdering innocent people and the fact that the Confederate flag, by Democratic will, still flies at the South Carolina State House. I'm not sure how to wrap my head around it. What happened to this more moderate version of JD Vance? How does somebody change their position so dramatically in such a short amount of time? This modern-day Trump-dominated Republican Party corrupts anyone who gets involved in it and doesn't allow for any compassionate or different voices. Sadly, the only way to make it in the Republican Party is to be a hardcore warrior at the fringe end of the culture war. In 2014, JD Vance and his wife moved to Washington, D.C., where JD Vance's wife was pursuing a clerkship with a Supreme Court justice. Look at this exchange between JD and his friend Sophia. Mr. Vance also wrote about his wife's interviews with justices of the Supreme Court, where she was seeking a clerkship. Mr. Vance worried that her seemingly politically neutral or lack of ideological chops could harm her chances. Scalia and Kagan moved very quickly, Mr. Vance wrote, referring to Antonin Scalia, the conservative justice who died in 2016, and Elena Kagan, one of the court's current 3 liberal justices, but she was just not going to work out for Scalia. Nelson wrote back, his homophobic screeds are hard to believe in 2014. He's become a very shrill old man, Mr. Vance responded. I used to really like him, and I used to believe all of his stuff about judicial minimalism was sincere. Now I see it as a political charade. Speaking of political charades, that's exactly what JD Vance is engaging in right now. And that is a huge no-no to criticize somebody like Antonin Scalia in conservative circles. JD Vance wouldn't dare utter something like that now. JD Vance was quite anti-Trump back in 2015, and he had some choice words about the rhetoric Trump was using about Muslims. Look at this. JD Vance wrote in an email to Sophia, I'm not even sure how I feel about this Muslim stuff. I'm obviously outraged at Trump's rhetoric, and I worry most of all about how welcome Muslim citizens feel in their own country. But I also think that people have always believed crazy shit. I remember a poll from a few years back suggesting that a near majority of Democratic voters blamed the Jews for the financial crisis. And there have always been demagogues willing to exploit the people who believe crazy shit. It's pretty wild to hear JD Vance call Donald Trump a demagogue who's exploiting people, because that's exactly what JD Vance and Donald Trump are doing right now. It is disgusting to see this naked pursuit of power causing someone to flip on these issues and opinions so plainly for all to see. In 2021, the state of Arkansas passed a bill banning gender transitioning care for minors. And JD Vance took a supportive position of this on social media, which seemed to alarm his friend Sophia, a trans woman. And she reached out to him via text message and had the following exchange with him. Sophia said, "Do you support the Arkansas legislation criminalizing providing medical care to trans kids?" And JD responded, "I do. I recognize this is awkward, but I'll always be honest with you. I think the trans thing with kids is so unstudied that it amounts to a form of experimentation." And Sophia responded, "It deeply saddens me that you feel that way, especially given that it has been studied and there is a consensus in the medical and psychological professions. The treatment is completely reversible, is only given after extensive therapy with the consent and desire of the child and parents, and saves lives. I know I can't change your mind, but the political voice you have become seems so far from the man I got to know in law school." And that appears to be the end of their friendship. JD Vance throwing his friend under the bus as he pursues power at all costs, willing to change his views on everything and give in to the Trump cult so that he can be in power. JD Vance is a disgusting sycophant that Donald Trump chose because he'll do everything he asks him to do without any questions at all. But now Donald Trump might be regretting that decision to pick JD Vance after Joe Biden dropped out and Kamala Harris's campaign has surged with newfound energy. JD Vance was picked because Donald Trump thought he was surely going to win and he didn't have to worry about bringing in any new demographics or placating the more moderate wing of the party like the Nikki Haley voters out there. But now that Kamala has brought a whole new energy and the Republican Party's game plan against Joe Biden is useless and Joe Biden has absorbed all their attacks, and with just 100 days until the election, the Republicans are left floundering. And Donald Trump is totally screwed with having JD Vance on the ticket and adding nothing of value to his candidacy. Between all the memes about couches and dolphins and childless cat ladies ruining America, JD Vance appears to be quite the drag on Donald Trump's ticket. And now rumors are swirling that Donald Trump may even try to replace JD Vance on the ticket. Wouldn't that be an upset? As we get closer to the election, more and more stories like this about JD Vance are going to come out. And it seems like JD Vance is going to continue to take away the spotlight from Donald Trump in a negative way, which is the worst sin possible in Trump's world. JD Vance may end up being one of the worst VP picks a presidential candidate has ever made, even worse than Sarah Palin. And I can't think of anybody who deserves that more than Donald Trump.